Hey guys, tonight we follow a man who never wrote a treatise, never discovered a star, and yet spent nearly half a century walking among some of the most important minds of the Ottoman Empire, holding a mop. You're not exactly dressed for a gala. You've got a cotton tunic, sandals that squish a little from last night's rain, and a bucket that smells vaguely like vinegar and roasted sheep fat. That's your polish. It's 1577, and you've just arrived for your first day working at the Taqi ad-Din Observatory in Istanbul. Now, you probably won't survive this job if you expect glory or conversation. These astronomers? They don't talk to janitors. They mutter at the stars. They lecture to walls. And they have long, curled beards you're certain are used to store crumbs. You're here to sweep, swab, scrape, and make sure no ink blot or dead moth sullies the gleam of Murad III's precious observatory. You trudge up the stairs, floor by floor, past rooms with brass globes so complicated they look like divine pasta. And you start your real work in the corridor between the charting hall and the coffee room. The floor tiles are Ottoman Iznik, beautiful blue and white swirls hand-fired by artisans with an eye for geometry. You spill goat soap water across the grout and scrub. You scrub while someone behind a screen debates the angle of Mars at conjunction. You scrub through a monologue on parallax and a muffled fart from the assistant in the corner who thinks no one's listening. A guard dozes nearby, seated beside a stack of empty ink pots. You wonder if he's dreaming about the stars or the stew he left simmering at home. The smell of lamb and spices seeps up from the kitchens and nearly knocks you out. Your hands grow wrinkled from soap before the sun even rises. Out the high window, you spot Venus burning pale in the early sky. You wonder if it ever needs polishing. That's your rhythm. Mornings in quiet corridors. Afternoons dodging scholars who forget janitors exist. Evenings swiping soot from oil lamps with a rag you've named Ahmed because you've been alone too long. The observatory is one of the most advanced in the Islamic world. Founded by Taqi ad-Din Muhammad ibn Marif, a man whose eyes bulge like overfilled waterskins. He doesn't notice you, not even when you sneak by to dump a bucket. But his calculations matter. His astrolabe work rivals Tycho Brahe's. Though he's never met the guy. Historians still argue whether Taqi ad-Din's mechanical clocks were more accurate than the European ones. You don't care. Clocks are just more things to dust. Sometimes you sit in the library to eat your dried figs. The librarian pretends not to see you as long as you don't chew too loud. You stare at ancient pages showing phases of the moon, diagrams of eclipses, and notes in a script so elegant it makes your spine straighten. You try not to sneeze. Last time, you got kicked for getting crumbs on a manuscript. Your quarters are a little closet behind the servant's latrine. It's warm. It smells like boiled onions and the ink from the scribe room next door. Every night, you lie on a straw mat and listen to the scratch of quills through the wall. There's something peaceful about it. Until a scholar shrieks at 3 in the morning because he miscalculated the distance to Saturn by 3 parasangs. That's the third Saturn-related outburst this week. Still, your job matters. Without you, the place would turn into a rat-infested ink swamp. The janitor before you lasted 3 days. The one before that slipped on oil and lost 3 teeth. You take pride in lasting longer. You notice things. Which scholars cheat off each other? Which assistants are secretly in love? Which chamber has the leaky roof that drips on the star maps? You patch it yourself using a tarp and a prayer. One afternoon, a scholar bursts in shouting something about the Great Conjunction. You don't know what that is. But you know someone's about to spill coffee. You rush to mop before it ruins another manuscript. The astronomer thanks no one. Just walks off. You quietly save a priceless document and go back to work. Your fingers are always stained, soot, ink, polish. Maybe a bit of blood from that accident with the globe stand. Your knees creak. Your back sings old janitorial hymns. But when the night comes, and everyone else has gone home, you stand by the giant brass telescope mounted on the balcony. And for just a moment, you look up. The sky is wider than your paycheck, but also quieter than any room you've ever cleaned. Sometimes you whisper to the stars, telling them what you did today, polished the planetarium globe, scraped pigeon droppings off the parapet, avoided eye contact with a philosopher from Cairo who smells like cumin and regret. The stars never answer, but they also never complain. That's rare. The observatory hums with knowledge and coffee breath. You hum back, broom in hand, heart steady. No one asked for you to be here this long. But no one told you to stop either. And so it begins. One man, one mop, 47 years of celestial janitorial duty. The Ottoman Empire might forget you. But this marble floor never will. You stretch your arms as sunlight trickles through the stained glass dome. Its colorful rays dancing across the floor tiles like a lazy mosaic come to life. It's not even noon, but your knees already feel like 2 sacks of lentils tied together with frayed rope. You've just finished polishing the brass door handles of the main observatory hall, again. Because yesterday, a diplomat's sweaty hand left behind something that looked suspiciously like fig paste. The place must shine, not because anyone asks you to. Certainly not because they thank you. But because if even one scholar notices grime, that will be the day Sultan Murad III decides to pop in. And you'll be the one blamed for cosmological misalignment due to smudged tile. There are rumors that the Sultan plans to visit soon. No one knows when, or even if, but the very possibility sends everyone into a cleaning frenzy. Except they don't actually clean. They just look panicked and knock things over. So, of course, you get to polish the marble steps 3 times in 1 week while dodging frantic astrologers holding scrolls longer than your rent contract. You move like a ghost through the halls. Fast, quiet, invisible. Scholars argue about planetary retrograde while you mop under their feet. They don't see you, but they do notice if the floor isn't reflecting their silken robes just right. You've started carrying a cloth in your waistband just to buff footstep marks on demand. You're not a janitor. You're a celestial image consultant. One night, while scrubbing the crescent windowsills, you hear a scholar muttering something about how Saturn's movement will predict the next war. You peek through the doorway just in time to see a tray of pomegranate seeds fall from a table. Scatter like glitter across the polished floor. He doesn't even flinch, just continues his rant about planetary war indicators while stepping directly onto the fruit and smearing it into your newly cleaned tiles. You consider shouting, but instead, you sigh so loudly your mop wilts. Later, while scraping the juice stains out of the grout with a piece of broken ceramic, you wonder if Saturn also governs patience. One of your more thankless responsibilities is the lantern work. The great main dome has over 100 oil lamps, each of which needs to be trimmed, cleaned, refilled, and reignited every few days. The job takes hours, and that's assuming no one knocks over a ladder or sets their beard on fire like Assistant Khalid did last winter. That man still smells like roasted rosemary. The good news is the observatory rarely catches fire. Mostly because you hover with a bucket during any ritual involving flames. Historians still argue whether the observatory ever hosted Sultan Murad in person. Some claim he came once, in disguise, to observe the comet of 1577. Others say he never set foot inside and simply read the reports sent by Taqi ad-Din. You don't know. You just remember the month everyone waxed the stairs until they were lethal. 3 scholars slipped, 2 limped. 1 blamed Mars. Despite the rumors, the Sultan sends money, enough to keep everyone in ink, lamb stew, and star charts. You occasionally handle coins when errands fall to you. One day, you're tasked with picking up scrolls from a book dealer across town. You bring them back tied neatly with string. No one thanks you, but you're fairly sure one scroll is a copy of Ptolemy Almagest. Handwritten and lined with gold leaf. You carried it like it was your own child. The strangest part is how little any of them question your presence. You've become a fixture, like the squeaky hinge on the astronomy cabinet or the slight dip in the center of the marble floor. You're not staff, you're infrastructure. Over time, you start adding tiny flourishes to your cleaning routine. A swirled pattern in the polish on the east corridor floor. A secret buff mark shaped like a tiny crescent in the corner by the library. No one notices. That's how you know they're perfect. Your evenings have become ritual. First the broom dance in the lobby. Then the polish shuffle in the planetarium. Then a moment of rest on the balcony, where the wind smells like sea salt and old parchment. Sometimes you spot stars, sometimes just clouds, but always the same stillness. As if the universe waits for your daily routine to conclude before spinning on. Your hands develop calluses in the shape of broom handles. Your nails are permanently dark from soot and ink. Your back begins to crook slightly from years of hunched scrubbing. But your eyes remain sharp. You can spot a stain from 30 feet. even if it's under a tapestry and partially concealed by a chart of lunar parallax. One early morning, as you prepared to sweep the western annex, you overhear a scholar explaining how the Earth rotates on its axis. You pause. You know this. You've heard the theory explained 17 different ways while you dusted the same bookshelf. But something about this time feels different. You think, maybe, you rotate too. Around this place. Around these people. A quiet axis of mop and bucket. Orbiting the grand machinery of intellect. You light a lantern and continue. It flickers slightly, casting long shadows over a chart labeled, Predicted Solar Eclipses, 1580 to 1650. You sweep gently beneath it and hope the stars appreciate how clean their predictions look. Tomorrow, you'll wax the brass railing on the observation deck. After that, scrub the pigeon stains from the dome. The stars demand nothing less. The floor squeaks beneath your bare feet. Not from lack of polish, no. Never that, but from humidity. It's the rainy season, and Istanbul's air clings to you like gossip. You squint at the fogged windows of the observatory, breathing in that curious cocktail of wet limestone, ink, sweat, and overcooked lentils. You reach for your mop. Another long night of celestial janitorial artistry begins. By now, your movements are precise. Muscle memory handles the broom while your mind floats free, drifting between the murmured debates of the scholars and your own imagined theories. Like why Assistant Haran always hums when Mars is out. Or why the telescope room always smells faintly of cardamom and gilt. You've developed a sort of dance, dodging astronomers in silk robes while pushing your mop just ahead of their slippered feet. Sometimes they mutter, "Excuse me." Mostly, they treat you like a ghost trained in spot removal. One of them even tried to use you as a reference point for calculating angular displacement. You were flattered until you realized he thought your mop handle was a fixed staff. The observatory's halls are lined with globes, some terrestrial, others celestial, brass, silver, some decorated with inlays of lapis lazuli and bone. You've learned not to touch the globes. Not because they're sacred, but because every time you polish one, someone inevitably recalibrates it and then blames you for the change in axis tilt. This morning, you found a glass orb rolling across the floor. So delicate it looked like it might pop under its own confusion. You caught it with your sleeve, placed it gently back on a velvet stand, and then backed away like you'd just handled royal jewelry. No one saw, of course. The scholars walk around in their own orbits. Taqi ad-Din himself once brushed past you muttering equations under his breath. Ink dripping from his sleeve like blood from a butcher's apron. His head was wrapped in a turban so dense you suspected it stored backup star charts. He didn't even blink at your presence. Historians still argue whether Taqi ad-Din ever respected the support staff who kept his observatory humming. Some say he saw janitors as part of the machinery, essential but interchangeable. Others believe he once wrote a note of appreciation on the back of a soiled parchment and promptly lost it under a pile of moon charts. You overheard a visitor once marvel at the sheer precision of the observatory's layout. But they never realize it's your polish that makes the marble gleam so that shadows fall correctly. It's your gentle sweeping that lets footsteps echo in that satisfying, scholarly rhythm. The building only breathes because you make sure the vents stay clear of pigeon feathers and centuries-old lint. One rainy night, as thunder rolled outside and the scholars were busy charting the erratic path of what they insisted was a meteor shower, you found a new broom leaning against the wall. No note, just a clean, fresh tool. You picked it up and used it without comment. You never found out who left it. Possibly a sign from a fellow janitor. Possibly a pity gift from the heavens. You start to notice things no one else sees. A crack forming behind the north pillar. A loose floor tile by the main lens pedestal. A water stain on the ceiling that looks suspiciously like the shape of Ursa Major. You begin keeping a quiet log in your head. Star-shaped damage reports. Cosmic misalignments caused by human carelessness. Once, you stepped into the shadow of a scholar who smelled like sandalwood and misfiled footnotes. He was ranting about Mercury's orbit, waving a chart so close to your face you could read the annotations upside down. You waited patiently for him to step aside, then swept around him in a perfect half-moon arc. He didn't notice, but another scholar, older, quieter, raised an eyebrow at your maneuver. You nodded at each other like two monks passing in a corridor. You've started to wonder if perhaps you're becoming a bit too fluent. Last week you corrected a mislabeled constellation on a chalkboard. You didn't mean to. It just slipped out. That's Capricorn, not Sagittarius, you muttered, and the whole room went silent. The scholar turned, frowned, and then shrugged. Fine, erase it and rewrite it. So you did. You're careful now. You don't want attention. Attention leads to questions. Questions lead to replacement. Better to be a shadow with a sponge than a spotlighted janitor with opinions. You've memorized the schedule. On Thursdays, charts are updated. On Fridays, the telescope gets cleaned, by you, of course. Using a linen cloth so fine it's technically forbidden to use on anything but skin. On Saturdays, the scholars argue more than usual. Possibly due to lack of sleep. That's also when they spill the most ink. You carry extra rags. Your hands twitch in your sleep now. Miming mop strokes. You dream of cleaning the moon's surface. Scraping stardust off the rings of Saturn. Or dusting comets mid-flight. You wake up and find your blanket folded into spiral galaxy patterns. The cleaning itself has become meditative. There's something profoundly calming about restoring order in a place devoted to understanding the universe's chaos. You sweep and the dust obeys. You polish and the stone reflects. You oil the hinges and silence the creaks of history. You begin to believe the observatory is alive. That it exhales when the last lantern is lit. That it hums in pleasure when its corners are spotless. That it trusts you, maybe even needs you. No one else would notice if the azimuth quadrant had a chip in its base. You do. You fix it with resin and a firm prayer. Then you go back to washing the window that overlooks the Bosphorus. You count 3 ships. One looks like it might be bringing more coffee. You make a note to polish the brass tray in anticipation. The scholars stay focused on their charts. You stay focused on the scuff marks they leave behind. Everyone has their orbit. Yours just happens to include a broom, a bucket, and a growing suspicion that you know more about the movements of people than they know about the movements of stars. The moon hangs low tonight, casting just enough light through the narrow upper windows to make your mop shimmer faintly with every drag across the tiled observatory floor. You're halfway through your midnight loop, the quietest part of your shift. The astronomers have finally gone to their sleeping quarters or passed out face first into star maps. Whichever came first. The only sounds left are the dull drip of water from the rooftop gutters and the sharp tick of Taqi ad-Din's mechanical clockwork model in the central dome. Which sounds eerily like a beetle clicking its pincers. You yawn, the kind that ripples through your whole body like a small earthquake. Your eyelids weigh more than your bucket. So, naturally, it's time for coffee. You've perfected the art of brewing bitter black Turkish coffee with a heat stone tucked discreetly into the back hall oven. Wedged between drying rags, you scoop the grounds with a spoon you filched from the kitchen 2 years ago and brew it in a dented copper pot that somehow survived being kicked down the stairs by a terrified assistant during an eclipse incident. That pot has become your closest confidant. You call it Rusty. You sip slowly in the supply room, seated on an overturned crate of wax candles. The air is thick with the scent of polish, ink, and the faint medicinal bite of boiled herbs someone forgot in the apothecary wing. The room is dark, save for the candle stub you've wedged into a cracked wall sconce. It flickers as if unsure whether to stay awake with you or give up and go dark. You listen to the building breathe. A wood beam groans above your head. A rat skitters along a rafter, dragging what sounds suspiciously like a quill pen. Probably yours. You sigh, slurp your coffee, and get back to work. It's during these night shifts that you start noticing things, really noticing. Not just stains and dust, but patterns. The same ink blot appears every Tuesday on the same desk. The same scholar drops his chalk exactly 22 minutes into his evening calculations. Someone, likely Assistant Bilal, leaves fig pits in the west stairwell like breadcrumbs for janitorial rage. You've cleaned this building so thoroughly, so consistently, that your body knows it better than your own dreams. You can walk blindfolded from the library to the main dome without tripping. You know which floorboards squeak when stepped on with the left foot versus the right. You know which window panes hum slightly in strong wind. You even know which scholars sleep the deepest based on the loudness of their snores echoing down the marble halls. The observatory itself has rhythms. A strange heartbeat of knowledge and noise. In the mornings, it's murmuring. By noon, it's bustling. Evenings bring furious debates and flying parchments. But after midnight, It's all yours. The whole building becomes a cathedral of quiet chaos. And you're the only priest who knows the liturgy of the mop. Historians still argue whether night laborers at the great scientific institutions were ever considered part of the intellectual fabric. You already know the answer. No one asks your opinion. No one even records your name. But you do leave messages. Hidden ones. You sign your initials, just one letter. Subtly etched into a hidden tile behind the northeast stairwell. You change the angle of the lanterns slightly so they create better shadows on the charts. You've even adjusted the curtain rods to allow more airflow during summer nights. Not science, but silent improvement. Once, you caught yourself muttering along with a scholar's lecture while wiping down the telescope brass. Retrograde motion is a visual illusion caused by Earth's own orbit. You said it so casually you startled yourself. You paused, blinked, then whispered, "What have I become?" Another night, you crept into the charting room after the scribes had gone to bed. Just to look, just to be near the papers. You didn't touch anything, of course, except for that one time a page caught on a breeze and began to fall. And you instinctively snatched it mid-air with a grace that would have shamed a trained falconer. No applause followed, just silence, so you set it back and left the room. The coffee helps, keeps you sharp when the weight of sleep starts pressing down like a stone tablet. You've rationed your grounds carefully. A sack lasts longer than it should. You've even traded polish recipes for beans with a merchant who owed you a favor after you found his lost ledger in a gutter and dried it using your personal rags stash. That ledger smelled terrible for a week, but worth it. There's a kind of nobility in your routine. Wake, work, watch, wander, wipe, repeat, and in between all of it, moments of pure, strange beauty. A bat flapping against the lantern glow. A moment when all the stars align above the courtyard fountain. The sound of a scroll unrolling like a distant drumbeat in the quiet. You once caught a scholar weeping in the hallway. Not in pain, but in awe. He had just calculated something about the moons of Jupiter. You nodded to him, broom in hand. He nodded back. No words, but for one brief moment, you were equals. You often wonder what the stars would think of you. Not the scholars. Not the Sultan, but the stars themselves, the ancient silent watchers. Would they consider your labor part of the great celestial story? You've never mapped a constellation, but you've wiped plenty off the soles of careless feet. One scholar joked that janitors see more than astronomers do. You smiled politely, but inside you knew, it wasn't a joke. You're halfway through scrubbing the great circular floor beneath the observation dome when you hear a clatter from behind the latticework screen. Someone's dropped another astrolabe. Again, you don't even flinch. Just shift your grip on the mop and move to the next tile. The dome above reflects your every movement, this sacred floor of stars. This delicate marble galaxy that requires weekly repolishing thanks to the scholar's tendency to stomp about like caffeinated goats. You've developed a kind of expertise over the years. Not in astronomy per se, but in proximity to it. You now know, with eerie accuracy, which instruments require handling with gloves and which ones are built so solidly they could survive a siege. You know to never touch the brass quadrant unless someone screams. You know to always clean the base of the celestial globe first so that no one notices the dried lentil you chipped off it last week. But above all, you know that the astronomers do not speak your name. You're just him, or that fellow with the rag. One once referred to you as part of the infrastructure. That same scholar later left his sandal in a bucket of lye and blamed you for its disintegration. You apologized, then smiled privately when you saw the heel marks he left through the entire west corridor. You cleaned them, of course, but not before admiring their chaotic arcs. One day, you're sweeping behind the scribe's desk when you catch a conversation. Two assistants arguing over the precession of the equinoxes. One insists the stars shift over centuries. The other accuses him of heresy. You pause, because you've heard this debate before. You know both sides now. You even remember which chart they're both referencing incorrectly. You blink, shake your head, and go back to your broom. Best not to get involved. But later that night, you find yourself whispering your own answer to the empty hallway, just to let the observatory know someone was paying attention. Historians still argue whether the Taqi ad-Din Observatory truly adopted European methods before anyone else in the East. Some believe it was isolated, clinging to outdated models. Others say it was ahead of its time. You've watched them bring in instruments from Venice. Tools packed in straw and sealed with wax that smells like pine and politics. You've unpacked them, you've cleaned them, you've hidden the fact that one arrived cracked and was quickly glued together with rice paste. You don't ask questions. There's a table in the northern wing no one uses anymore. It's warped from a fire that occurred during a disastrous lantern accident, your predecessor's last day. You cleaned up the scorch marks. You cleaned up the broken glass. You even salvaged the bits of star chart that hadn't crumbled. Then you stashed them in a small wooden box under your cot. Not theft, just preservation. You've come to see yourself as the observatory's quiet archivist. The one who catalogs with hands, not ink. You begin to realize that your language is shifting. You no longer think in terms of dirt and stain. You think in terms of celestial interference. That oil spill in the corridor? A shadow misalignment. That dust on the telescope lens? Atmospheric sabotage. You're not just cleaning anymore. You're preserving the purity of observation. One afternoon, you polish the lens casing while an astronomer lectures a group of apprentices about the fixed stars. He misquotes a Greek source. You murmur the correction to yourself. Quietly. The way you might hum a lullaby you heard long ago. One apprentice hears, glances back, doesn't say anything, but the next day, that same passage has been amended. That night, you're cleaning the soot from the lantern chimneys when you pause to stare out across the city. Minarets rise like tuning forks against the night sky. Below, the Bosphorus glimmers under a sliver of moonlight. The city sleeps, but up here, knowledge never does. A gust of wind rattles the shutters. You move to close them, only to find someone's left a parchment pinned to the wall. It's a sketch of Saturn, orbiting in a loop traced by a sure hand. In the corner, a note. Do not erase. You haven't touched it in weeks, but you've dusted around it. Carefully. Someone noticed. You keep your discoveries secret. Like the fact that the marble in the western hallway forms a pattern that resembles the Taurus constellation. You've enhanced it, very slightly, with discreet polishing. No one knows, but when the light hits it just right, the bull rises from the floor like a celestial ghost. You've become strangely superstitious. You knock twice on the same window pane before polishing it. You avoid stepping on your own reflection in the polished floor. You never mop during a lunar eclipse. Not since the last time, when you fell down the stairs and no one found you for hours. You talk to the tools now. Not out loud, that would be madness, but in your head. Every brush has a temperament. Every rag a favorite corner. You trust the old mop more than the new one, even though it smells faintly of goat. One evening, you accidentally walk in on a meeting between scholars and a visiting Persian mathematician. You freeze. They stare. You bow slightly and begin backing out, mop in hand like a scepter. The mathematician, amused, asks your name. You give it. The scholars blink. Some of them clearly never knew you had one. Later, you find a small pouch of dried apricots left on your cleaning stool. No note, but you eat them anyway. And then, as you sweep the observation dome once more before sleep, you notice a scratch in the baseboard shaped like a star. Not one you put there. Someone else, maybe a janitor before you. Maybe the building itself. You nod at it, and move on. You hear the squeaking first. It's rhythmic, rapid, and oddly wet. You freeze mid-sweep. Then slowly peer under the staircase in the storage wing. Candle in hand, two small eyes blink back at you. A rat, a fat, well-fed rat, and in its tiny mouth? A string. Attached to that string? A parchment scrap with what appears to be a list of star coordinates scribbled in wild ink. You blink. The rat blinks. You both consider the situation. Then, without any apology, the rat drags the parchment into its little corner behind the wall panel. A second rat appears, this one dragging a scrap of bread. They're building a nest, a scholarly nest. You're not sure whether to be horrified or impressed. Over the next few weeks, you see them often. The same pair, gray with little white noses, emerging only after the scholars leave. They drag quills, ink-soaked rags, scraps of scrolls, even what looks suspiciously like a broken piece of compass. You begin calling the bold one Ptolemy. His timid partner is Little Mars. They're smarter than some of the interns. One evening, you leave a discarded fig by the crack in the wall. It's gone by morning, along with 3 rat droppings and 1 oddly placed inkwell. Now empty. You could report them, but you don't. Rats are not your enemies. They don't yell about retrograde planets or complain that the floor feels gritty. They also don't leave wax seals melted into your clean surfaces. Instead, they build tiny rat observatories out of stolen brass filings. At least, that's your working theory. You start making detours during your routine just to check on them. Occasionally you leave them items. Lint-free cloth. A drop of olive oil. A single grape. In return, Ptolemy sometimes drops scraps of astronomy charts you swear no one else should have access to. Where is he getting these? You're too afraid to ask. Historians still argue whether rodents were a common nuisance in Ottoman libraries and observatories. But none of them mention this sort of rodent behavior, coordinated, precise, almost reverent. You've begun imagining that Ptolemy might be deciphering celestial logic from a rat's eye view. The way others chart planets. Maybe he sees something the scholars don't. Maybe he's just looking for more fig. Your own nightly rhythm adjusts. You clean, then sit for a moment in the hallway beside the rat's favorite crack. Whispering quiet updates. They dropped a scroll in the latrine again. Or, another comet sighting this week. Caused 3 fainting spells. Sometimes you think they're listening. The scholars, of course, notice none of this. They're too busy arguing over azimuth readings and who stole whose moon phase notes. There was an actual shouting match last week over a misdrawn meridian. You were mopping nearby. You accidentally let out a snort when one of them tried to draw a rebuttal diagram using jam. That earned you a look. Just one, but it was enough to remind you. Janitors don't snort during science. Still, you've become oddly indispensable. One morning, the head scribe waved you over, muttered something about the quiet one who remembers things, and asked you to fetch a misplaced parchment. You nodded. You knew exactly where it was. Folded under the corner of a broken bookstand. Covered in dust. You didn't even need to check. You returned it, and the scribe nodded back with what might have been respect, or indigestion. Hard to tell. There's a section of the observatory no one visits anymore. An old storage loft above the astronomy classroom. Accessible only by ladder. It smells like mildew and forgotten math. You've cleaned it occasionally, mostly out of boredom, but lately, you've been stashing your own notes there. Observations, strange findings, names of scholars who drink too much coffee and forget their formulas. A small notebook you stitched from scraps of parchment. Labeled, The Janitor's Guide to the Heavens. Inside it, you write things like, third quadrant window reflects Venus best during fog, or, east corridor echoes differently during solstice. Nothing a scholar would care about. But to you, these are constellations in the observatory's own sky. One of your entries is about the rats. You draw a tiny map of their movement paths. Arcs and loops. One route even matches the pattern of a known lunar orbit. Coincidence? Or is Ptolemy trying to teach you something? One night, you're sweeping near the northwest lantern rack when a junior scholar trips and sends a flask of ink flying. It splatters across the floor in a magnificent arc, comet-shaped. Almost. The others gasp. He turns pale. You kneel, begin blotting it up, and hear someone mutter, "Good thing the cleaner knows more about orbits than you do." You don't look up, but inside, you grin. The next evening, you find a folded parchment tucked into your mop bucket. It's unsigned, but the handwriting is clean and precise. Inside is a small sketch of a rat, wearing glasses. Underneath, he knows more than we think. You hold the note for a long time. Later that week, Ptolemy vanishes. You don't see him for several nights. You worry. You leave figs, a drop of honey, a borrowed scrap of someone's planetary observation notes. Nothing. The observatory feels quieter. Even the brass orrery seems to move a little slower. Then, one night, while cleaning the corridor between the library and the lunar calculations chamber, you see a tiny ink paw print on the floor. Just one, smudged, followed by a grapeseed. You feel relief, as if a friend returned from a long journey. The stars shift every night. The floor gathers dust every day. And somehow, between them, you and a rat named Ptolemy carry out your quiet work. Tonight, Istanbul is unusually still. Not even the usual squawks from the minaret towers or the distant clatter of mule carts on the cobbles. The observatory feels like it's holding its breath. You don't like it. You step into the central hall with your mop and bucket, expecting the usual constellation of dirty footprints and spilled ink. But instead, you find something more troublesome: chalk marks everywhere. Diagrams, circles, arrows, scribbles along the floor, across desks. Even on the edge of the dome stairs. Someone's been busy. At first, you assume it's just overenthusiastic calculations. But then you notice the scrawled lines aren't labeled. No numbers. No formulas. Just looping curves and jagged slashes. You glance up. A comet. Bright and angry. Slicing across the sky like a blade through velvet. That explains it. You sigh. Mop in hand. Because you already know what's coming. Panic. Comets, historically, never go unnoticed. Especially not in royal cities full of scholars. Court advisors. And doom-fixated coffee sellers. By breakfast, half the observatory will be arguing over whether it signals war, famine, or the death of someone with too many titles. You begin cleaning the chalk anyway. You've done this before. During the last lunar eclipse, someone drew a 30-foot diagram of a celestial eye across 3 corridors. You mopped until your knuckles went numb. By mid-morning, the observatory is chaos. A senior astronomer has declared the comet an omen of imperial crisis. Another believes it signals the rise of a long-lost dynasty. A third is crying in the records room because his star charts no longer align. You just keep cleaning. At one point, a scholar slips on your freshly polished tile, points at the sky, and screams, "It's accelerating." It isn't, but you nod politely. You've always found comets a bit underwhelming. Flashy, sure, but they leave a mess behind. Both in the heavens and on your marble. Historians still argue whether this particular comet of 1577 had any long-term political impact. Some claim it inspired Taqi ad-Din's most ambitious observations. Others say it led to unnecessary hysteria and some truly unfortunate tax policy decisions. You remember it mostly as the comet that caused someone to knock over 5 inkpots in one night. That evening, while rinsing soot off the brass telescope supports, you overhear 2 assistants whispering about possible evacuations. One is convinced the Sultan will close the observatory to avoid celestial contamination. The other believes the janitor might secretly be an astrologer in disguise. You nearly drop your rag. After dinner, lentil stew and stale flatbread, you climb to the rooftop dome for fresh air. The sky is absolutely roaring with stars. And the comet? It's drifting lazily now, like it got tired of being dramatic. You sit on the cool stone parapet and sip from your dented water flask, squinting at the trail of gas and dust it's left behind. You try to remember what Taqi ad-Din said last week about comet paths. Something about parabolas. You wonder if that curve across the southern tile hall was someone's attempt to model it. Or just an over-caffeinated tantrum. The janitorial work has doubled. Chalk footprints everywhere. Papers scattered in rooms you haven't even seen opened in months. Someone broke a globe stand trying to recalculate its destiny. You fix it with glue and shame. Then, just after midnight, you see something curious. The rat, Ptolemy, sitting on a windowsill, staring directly at the comet with what you swear is awe. Or maybe just hunger. But the way his whiskers twitch, the stillness in his tiny rodent frame, it mirrors your own posture. You've never felt closer to another living being. You whisper, "What do you see up there?" No answer. Just starlight. You go back to cleaning the southern corridor, humming under your breath. A lullaby your mother used to sing. Something about bread and salt and time. When the comet finally begins to fade over the following nights, so too does the hysteria. The scholars slowly stop arguing. Some begin double-checking their math. A few even apologize to the stars. Not to you. Taqi ad-Din announces a breakthrough. Claims he's charted the comet's curve with such precision that future scholars will use it for reference. You clean the edge of his chalkboard and spot a note in the corner. Position recorded by eye and intuition. Instruments insufficient. You wonder if he realizes how many calculations he's made with grime on his lens. You've cleaned that lens 12 times this week alone. You wonder what would happen if you left one thumbprint. You don't. That week, you also notice something stranger. Someone has reorganized the cleaning supplies. Not just moved them, but arranged them into a grid. Brooms by length, buckets by dent severity, cloths folded into shapes that look suspiciously like constellations. You look around. No one's there, not even the rats. You smile. By the end of the month, the comet is gone. People stop talking about portents. They start talking about footnotes and funding again. The chalk gets swept up. The papers sorted. One scholar faints from exhaustion and falls face first into a pile of star maps. You help him up, give him water, and mop his drool off the celestial axis. No one ever thanks you. But one of them does leave behind a warm piece of baklava on your workbench. It smells like rosewater and sugar. You pretend not to notice it for a full hour before eating it in 3 precise bites. That night, with the comet's dust settled and the stars back to their usual twinkling, you stand on the balcony and whisper one final word. Clean. The floor is still sticky. You've scrubbed it twice already. But something, maybe molasses, maybe ink, maybe divine punishment, refuses to lift. It's directly beneath the long oak writing desk in the scribe's chamber. And every time you think it's gone, the light hits just wrong and reveals another smear. You groan, dip your rag again, and crawl back under the table, knees popping like old floorboards. You aren't just a janitor anymore. You've become a forensic cleaner. You've learned to identify 23 kinds of stains by smell alone. You can recognize the difference between ink made from oak galls and that awful concoction someone tried to make with burnt plum pits. You can tell how long a tea spill has aged by the degree of crust it forms around the cup ring. You once uncovered an entire ink pot someone had hidden beneath a floorboard crack because they were ashamed of wasting the Sultan's supplies. Today's mystery substance, however, remains nameless. You suspect it came from a late-night experiment involving fermented date juice, candle wax, and regret. But then comes the real disaster. A scholar, young, arrogant, and gifted with the kind of confidence usually reserved for sultans and roosters, bursts into the scribe's room shouting about a misplaced star chart. He waves his arms, accuses everyone, and knocks over a tray stacked with fresh parchment. The tray crashes. The parchment flies. One sheet lands in the sticky patch. Your heart drops. You reach for it, but not fast enough. A perfect black smear blooms across the parchment. You stare at it. So do 3 scholars, 1 scribe, and a mouse near the bookshelf who seems to have paused mid-nibble. The scholar howls, blames you. Of course. You want to explain that you were cleaning up his mess, not making your own. You want to scream. Instead, you simply bow your head, pick up the ruined parchment, and walk silently out of the room. That night, you sit by the rain barrel with the parchment stretched on your lap. You study the lines still visible beneath the stain. A constellation, partially drawn, star labels, inkwork more precise than a seamstress's stitches. You sigh. You don't know what this chart recorded, but you know it mattered. So you begin redrawing it. Not to trick anyone, not to replace it, but just to remember it. You've seen enough charts. You've swept enough fragments. You piece it together slowly, copying by candlelight onto a scrap of discarded vellum you salvaged from a rat nest last month. Your fingers ache, your lines wobble, but slowly, something beautiful begins to emerge. Historians still argue whether janitors ever contributed quietly to Ottoman intellectual work. There's no documented case of it, no credit, no evidence, but you suspect, just maybe, 1 or 2 dusty fingerprints made it into the margins. A week passes. No one mentions the ruined chart again. The arrogant scholar moves on to another project, something about Jupiter's moons. But you've hung your recreation behind the curtain in your cleaning nook. It's crooked, ink-stained, but you think it's better that way. Meanwhile, you notice that someone has started leaving little notes in the cleaning closet. First, it was a scribble. Wax formula? Then, do you use lemon oil? Then, your polish makes the telescope floor shine like a mirror. You write back, yes. Beeswax, vinegar, and crushed olive pits. The next note, respect. You keep the conversation going. Never names, just notes, hidden in the bottom drawer under the broken sextant no one ever uses. Eventually, the handwriting starts looking suspiciously like the senior scribe's. You say nothing, but you leave extra cloths in his room, just in case. You start refining your polish mixture, adding just a drop of rose water, a pinch of fine sand. The floor shines like it's trying to impress the stars themselves. Then one afternoon, disaster strikes again. While dusting a shelf in the North Archive, your cloth catches on something, a rolled parchment. It tumbles off the edge, unfurls midair, and lands directly in the pail of water by your feet. You yank it out with a gasp. But it's already too late. The ink bleeds, words blur, figures vanish. You lay it flat on a dry cloth and gently pat it. But the damage is done. This time, no one saw. You could hide it, pretend it never happened. You almost do. Instead, you take it to the senior scribe. You brace yourself. He looks at the parchment. Then at you. Then sighs. You've ruined something valuable, he says. You nod. He adds, but it's not the first time a janitor ruined something. And it won't be the last time a scribe leaves an archive shelf too full. He waves you away. You walk out blinking. That night, another note appears. We've all ruined something, but not all of us try to fix it. You smile for the first time in days. You get bolder. You leave a tiny cleaning guide tucked under the globe stand. Don't walk here with muddy boots. Rotate daily for even polish. Do not place stew bowls near Ptolemy Corner. The next day, someone's placed a barrier around that part of the floor, marked, reserved for celestial maintenance. You feel seen. And so, when no one's looking, you smudge your initials into the corner of your recreated star chart. Just 2 tiny letters, nothing more. You may not be an astronomer, but the stars know your name. Your wax polish is now famous within the observatory, though no one admits it aloud. Your concoction, beeswax, vinegar, olive pit powder, and a risky pinch of ash from the fireplace, is the only reason the telescope chamber looks like the sky is trying to reflect it. The floors don't just gleam, they glow. You've started calling it the starlight formula, mostly to amuse yourself. One morning, you catch a visiting scholar crouching by the floor, running his fingers across the grain like a sommelier sniffing soup. He whispers something about divine smoothness and asks where the servants buy marble. You just smile and continue polishing. You've become more experimental, not with astronomy. No, you still leave the sky mapping to the ink-stained dreamers. But you're cleaning? That's art now. You mix herbs into the air freshener, thyme, bay, crushed mint. You try a new rag fold that buffs corners better. You learn that boiled onion skins produce a gentle amber tint that makes brass look warmer. Like it's blushing. Some of the younger scholars start noticing. One calls it a visual ambiance conducive to higher thought. Another simply grunts and stops walking through your wax trails with dirty sandals. Progress. You begin leaving small notes in hidden places. A mark on the baseboard when a floorboard is loose. A chalk X near a leaking gutter. A 3-dot cluster beside the window that whines during storms. You never sign these, but they get fixed. Someone's reading. You think it's the building itself. Maybe the observatory is working with you now. Or maybe one of the scholars has taken a liking to your methods. Either way, the cooperation feels strangely intimate, like you're building a secret relationship with the walls and the intellects within them. Then one day, you find something new, behind a loose panel in the dome stairwell. Tucked into a dusty gap beside a brass bolt, there's a folded parchment sealed with wax. Not just any wax, a symbol pressed into it. A sun with 12 rays. You recognize it, the emblem of Taqi ad-Din himself. You hesitate. Then, because curiosity is stronger than fear, you break the seal. Inside, formulas, sketches, notes about a theoretical instrument that doesn't yet exist. A mechanical sighting rig. You understand none of it. But you recognize the urgency in the handwriting, rushed, obsessive, as though written between breaths. At the bottom, a line reads, "Too early. Not stable. Revisit in 10 years. You return the parchment carefully, resealing it with melted wax from your lantern. You won't tell anyone, not because of the danger, but because, in a way, it feels like the building spoke to you. Historians still argue whether Taqi ad-Din's final years were productive or paranoid. Some say he feared his ideas were too far ahead. Others say he simply ran out of time, paper, or allies. You now know he ran out of hiding spots. That stairwell panel hasn't been touched in years. That night, you create your own blend of polish. Your boldest yet. You call it the celestial finish. It smells faintly of almond and coriander. You test it in the east hallway. And by morning, a scribe walking across it stops in his tracks and says, "The stars would be jealous." He doesn't know you're around the corner, listening with a cloth in your hand and a smirk on your lips. Your tools have become extensions of yourself. The brass-banded bucket you patched with resin 2 winters ago. The cloth roll you stitched from a retired scholar's robe. Your favorite rag, worn to silk, you've named Haley, after the comet, after the chaos, after that long month of frantic scrubbing and sudden silence. You've started talking to your tools again, whispering encouragements. You do it less when people are around. But Ptolemy hears. He's back, fatter than before, clearly surviving well on stolen almond fragments and papyrus threads. You let him sleep inside your spare boot. The boot is ruined anyway. One morning, you're summoned, not just shouted for, summoned. An assistant with overly large ears and a scroll in his hand finds you and says, Master Taqi requests your presence. You've never been summoned before. You consider pretending to be someone else. But your name is right there on the scroll. Spelled incorrectly, but recognizable. You walk into the main dome and find Taqi ad-Din, wild-haired, holding a brass instrument with gears sticking out at angles that feel unsafe. He looks at you with eyes that haven't slept since the last sultan's birthday. You clean the telescope lens? You nod. You fixed the counterweight in the planetary model? You nod again. He narrows his eyes, then gestures to a stool. Sit. I need your hands. Your first instinct is to flee. But you sit. What follows is not a conversation. It's a monologue with occasional hand gestures, during which Taqi shoves odd parts into your hands, mutters about balance, and then watches how you adjust a gear. He nods. You wipe the grease from your fingers and silently adjust a misaligned bracket. He says nothing, but you catch him smiling. You leave without any formal thanks. But later that night, a scroll appears near your cleaning bucket. Blank, except for 3 words. Keep things turning. You don't sleep that night. Not because you're afraid, but because you're proud. Evliya Celebi arrives on a Tuesday, wearing a robe that looks like it insulted every color known to man and got away with it. His turban is enormous. His mustache is even larger. He sweeps into the observatory with the flair of a man who's been complimented far too often and knows it. You first spot him leaning dramatically against the zodiac mosaic in the central hall. One sandal dangling from his foot as he asks a poor assistant to explain how exactly this observatory does its stargazing. And would anyone mind terribly if I included a sketch of the janitor in my travel notes? You freeze mid-mop. He's looking at you. He walks over, points at your rag. What is that scent? Cinnamon? You blink. It's the new floor wax. Almond oil. With mint. He nods as if you've just recited a love poem. Then, without asking, he scribbles something into a notebook he pulls from his sash. You try to peek. He hides it. Trade secret, he says, as if you had asked him. Evliya is not like the other visitors. Most dignitaries stay a day or two. Nod politely. Then leave convinced they now understand celestial mechanics. Evliya stays a week, then 2, then a month. He doesn't study astronomy. He studies people. He follows scholars to lectures. He questions the cook about spice ratios. He examines the mop closet. You catch him one evening standing on a stool in the observatory pantry, looking down into a bucket and declaring, "Even the cleaning water in this place is wise." You mutter, "It's just lemon peel." But he's already moved on. Historians still argue whether Evliya ever exaggerated in his travel journals. Most agree the answer is yes. Just not in ways that made him less charming. He recorded things as they felt, not necessarily as they were. And apparently, what felt important to him in the Istanbul Observatory was not just the star charts, but the man who scrubbed the soot from beneath them. You try to avoid him after the first encounter, but he seems to have adopted you. You find fresh fruit left near your workbench with notes that say things like, "For the sage of sanitation," or "Keepers of dust" or "Guardians of memory." It's flattering, and also deeply confusing. One day, he watches you polish a brass telescope base. You do it the way you always do, tight circles, folded cloth, wrist steady. He doesn't speak until you finish. Then he says, "You have the hands of a calligrapher. Or a saboteur." You pause, hopefully not both. He laughs, slaps your shoulder, and writes something else in his notebook. Later that night, you find a sketch pinned to the broom rack. It's of you. At least, you think it's you. The figure is buffed up a bit, with heroic lighting and a sweeping mop pose. The caption reads, "The janitor who polishes time." You snort tea through your nose. But deep down, something stirs. No one's ever drawn you before. Certainly not in a heroic light. You start paying attention to Evliya's routines. He wanders, yes, but always listens. He records odd things. The timing of the echo in the south corridor. The pitch of Taqi's muttering. The number of steps between the tea room and the main dome. He's building a map, but not of space, of human movement. You once hear him ask a scholar, "Do the stars care who watches them?" The scholar doesn't respond, but you do. Quietly. They care more who remembers. Evlia turns, blinks, and for once, doesn't say anything. He leaves unexpectedly one morning, just before the sun rises. No grand farewell, no dramatic exit, just gone, but in his place, a small folded note on your workbench. Every empire forgets its janitors. Not this one. You carry it in your pocket for the next 40 years. 2 months later, the observatory receives a scroll, a copy of one of Evlia's travel reports. The scholars skim it for references to their star charts. They miss the part where he describes the observatory's marble floors as cleaner than a vizier's conscience. And twice as well polished. You don't. You also don't miss the paragraph describing a mysterious man of modest garb and mystical mop, who moved through the halls like a comet-shaped whisper. You nearly choke on your fig. You never speak of it aloud. But at night, when you sweep the hall where he once asked if the walls could sing, you whisper, they miss you. And maybe they do. For a time, things feel a bit emptier. The chalkboard diagrams are back to being dull. The scholars are quieter. Even the rats seem less interested in world-building. But you carry on, because buildings remember. And now you know you're part of what they remember with. And also, because someone left another sketch near the stairwell. This one shows a rat in a cape, wielding a pencil like a sword. You pin it behind your curtain. The morning the band comes down, everything is too quiet. You're sweeping the outer library hall, careful not to disturb a shelf that's already threatening collapse. When the first whispers flowed through the building, a courier had arrived. A decree had been unrolled. The kind with the Sultan's seal. The kind that makes people stop mid-sentence and swallow hard. You don't ask questions. You just listen. From the shadows. From the corners. It's what you do best. At first, no one believes it. The Sultan would never close this place. Someone says, he just funded a new quadrant. But the murmurs build. Then the shouting starts. And by late afternoon, every scholar in the observatory is clustered around the central hall. Sweat slicked and trembling. Mouths dry from rage. The decree is clear. The observatory must be dismantled. Astronomy, once a crown jewel, has become suspect. Too much sky-gazing. Not enough piety. Someone convinced Murad III that studying the heavens too closely invites divine punishment. Historians still argue whether this decision came from religious pressure, political paranoia, or just a bad dream the Sultan had after eating spoiled lamb. You hear 3 different theories within the hour. One claims it was a rival scholar whispering lies into royal ears. Another says a comet made him nervous. A third insists it was all because someone made a joke about the Sultan's horoscope. Whatever the reason, the outcome is not up for debate. The observatory is to be closed. The instruments, destroyed. You stand still, broom in hand, watching Taqi ad-Din stare blankly at the floor. He doesn't shout, doesn't argue, just blinks, like he's waiting to wake up. You step back into the corridor and begin sweeping. Because what else is there? That night, the observatory is louder than it's ever been. People pace, shout, sob. You see a scholar try to hide a star chart under his robe. Another clutches an astrolabe like it's a newborn. You mop around them all. In the morning, soldiers arrive. Not many, just enough. They don't touch the books. But the instruments, those are the target. You watch as the great brass armillary sphere is pushed over and cracks against the tile. The sound is something between a gong and a groan. You wince. Then you begin gathering the fragments. Quietly, piece by piece. You know which are salvageable. You tuck a few small gears into your sleeve. No one stops you. The telescope goes next. It takes 4 men to move it. They snap off the sighting arm. It dangles for a second, then drops like a snapped wing. You clean the splinters. The floor is littered with glass and brass. A week ago, it reflected star maps. Now it reflects sorrow. One soldier slips on a waxed tile. You think, briefly, that maybe you overdid the polish. You say nothing. He curses. You offer him a rag. He grunts. Taqi ad-Din doesn't try to stop them. He just sits at his desk, unmoving, while his life's work gets carted out like furniture during a flood. By the 3rd day, half the observatory is empty. The rooms echo differently now. No longer alive, just loud. You continue your routine. Sweep, mop, buff. You're not sure why. Maybe because someone has to. Maybe because you can't stop. Maybe because, underneath it all, you think the building is watching and grieving. That night, You find someone has left a candle burning in the western wing. You blow it out, gently. The next morning, the decree extends. All sky-watching materials must be removed, broken, or sealed. You hide a compass beneath a floorboard. You slide a cracked eyepiece behind a loose stone. You press a torn chart into the pages of a book no one reads. You become a one-man archive of forbidden stargazing. You also find yourself whispering apologies to the tools, to the gears, to the silent gnomons and cracked brass plates. "I'm sorry," you say, as you sweep a pile of crushed quadrant fragments into a cloth bag. One of the scribes flees the city. Another goes quiet forever. One starts talking to the shadows in the corner. You clean around them. Then, it's over. The observatory is closed, the gates chained, the guards posted, the scholars dismissed, the library locked. And yet, you return the next morning. The guards let you in. No one told them to stop the janitor. You clean the central hall. Alone. You sweep the echoing dome. Alone. You refill the lanterns. Even though no one's reading. You light a single one anyway. Someone has to. No footsteps echo through the halls anymore, just yours. Where once astronomers shuffled in trailing ideas and ink stains, there is now only silence. The observatory feels larger without voices. The walls seem farther apart. The staircases creak louder. The dust settles faster. But you still come. Each morning, you unlock the side gate with the iron key no one asked you to return. You dip your rag in oil. You polish the door handles. You open the windows just enough to keep the air from growing stale. You speak to no one. There is no one left to hear you. You sweep the marble floor beneath the dome. Not because anyone will walk across it, but because it still remembers them. You see their paths in your mind. Where the assistant used to pace. Where the head scribe stood every afternoon sipping fig water. Where the telescope once cast a long brass shadow. You clean those ghost trails, preserving not just space, but memory. One day, the lock on the library jams. You climb through the side window using a rope you braided from mop strings. The shelves stand still, untouched, like rows of sentinels waiting for orders that will never come. You dust them, every one, top to bottom. The smell of old paper and ink still hangs thick, stubborn as ever. You leave a single candle lit in the center of the room. Not for light, for comfort. You start making repairs, quiet ones. You rebind books with linen thread scavenged from old robes. You seal a crack in the northwest window with resin and a sliver of polished glass. You resuspend the armillary sphere. What's left of it? Using a hook you forged yourself from a curtain rod. You don't ask permission. There's no one left to deny it. Historians still argue whether the observatory ever operated in secret after its closure. Some claim a few loyal astronomers continued to work by moonlight. Others dismiss this as romantic fantasy. But you know the truth. The building never stopped. It simply learned how to hum more quietly. One rainy afternoon, you discover a leak in the dome. A small one, dripping onto the floor with irritating rhythm. You wedge a pot beneath it. Then you climb the inner ladder with a patch of copper plate and a bundle of sealant made from boiled flax. You repair it in the rain. Barefoot, soaked to the bone, you come down sneezing, but proud. Later that night, you write a new page in your secret notebook. Leak sealed, dome quiet, sky unbothered. You now know every inch of this place. You can navigate its halls blindfolded. You fix hinges before they creak. You realign shutters so the wind sings properly through the high corridors. You polish the brass sundial so that even cloudy days seem golden. And still, you are invisible. Even the new guards posted outside don't speak to you. They nod sometimes. One leaves you bread. Another once mumbled, "Thanks," after you swept a puddle away from his boots. But mostly, you exist to them like furniture. Necessary, but silent. You don't mind. The work is sacred now. Every week, you spend one night sleeping under the main dome. Just for the sound, for the way the wind moves through the oculus, for the way the stone seems to breathe when the moonlight hits it just right. One evening, as you mop the southern stairwell, you notice a scratch in the plaster. You lean closer. Not a scratch, a carving. I remember. You pause, press your palm against it. You whisper, "Me too." The next day, you discover a scrap of paper tucked into the base of a ruined chart stand. A drawing, a constellation, hand-sketched, labeled in a clumsy but familiar scrawl. It's not from the old scholars. It's too recent. Someone else has been here. You wait. You keep cleaning. Days pass. Then, one morning, a fresh footprint in the dust. Small, deliberate, pointing toward the library. You follow it. You leave the door open. Nothing. But the next day, the footprint is back. You place a lantern near the threshold. You leave the bucket full. You fold a clean rag and hang it from the doorknob. The day after, the bucket is empty. The rag is used. The lantern's been moved. You are not alone. You never were. The building is whispering again. You whisper back. And so your work continues. Not for recognition, not for reward, but because someone has to remember how the stars used to sound when they echoed across clean marble. The nights begin to stretch. Longer and quieter. You find yourself working more by candlelight. Not because the building demands it, but because you've grown to prefer the soft flicker of flame against polished stone. It soothes you. It makes the empty halls feel less empty. And lately, they don't feel as empty at all. More footprints. More evidence. Someone has returned. Or perhaps several someones. You never see them. Not directly. But you know the signs. A candle stub in the astronomy alcove that you didn't leave. A clean spot on a windowsill you hadn't touched in days. A book open on the northern lectern, last time you checked. That book had been sealed for months. They're careful. Just like you. They respect the building. They move quietly. They return chairs to the exact angle they found them. You've begun leaving clues in return. Freshly sharpened quills. A clean rag draped neatly on a bench. A pot of still warm tea on the west windowsill. Always gone by morning. One night, you hear a cough. You freeze in the hallway. Holding a duster made from pigeon feathers. The sound came from the library. Not a mouse. Not the wind. A human cough. Dry. Surprised. You step slowly into the library. But find no one. Just a scroll resting on the desk. Not one of the libraries. Newer. Handwritten. It reads, "The moon still rises. So do we." You don't smile. Not at first. You just nod. Then you sit. Right there. Beside the scroll. You don't touch it. But you do take out your notebook and add a line. They're back. And they clean. Historians still argue whether remnants of Ottoman scientific culture persisted in secret after the observatory's closure. Whether quiet rebels continued studying stars in basements, attics, ruined towers. You now know at least one such place, here. They come rarely. These quiet scholars. They never speak to you. But sometimes they leave things behind. A chart, newly inked. A broken astrolabe part, cleaned and waiting for repair. Once, a perfectly folded diagram tucked inside a broom handle. It labeled the position of Mars with an arrow and a small, respectful footnote. Found while sweeping. You hang that one in your work nook. The observatory hums again, not loudly, not as before, but it breathes. Its walls feel warmer, its windows less brittle, even the rats seem more active. Ptolemy scurries past you one evening dragging a quill and what looks suspiciously like a date pit wrapped in cloth. You whisper, "You're the real director now, aren't you?" He squeaks. You take that as a yes. One night, when the moon is high and the wind rattles the dome like 1,000 whispered secrets. You sit in the stairwell with a piece of charcoal. You stare at the smooth plaster wall. Blank. Clean. Too clean. You touch the charcoal to it. You begin to draw. Not words. Not symbols. But stars. Dots. Lines. Clusters. A map. Not of the sky above. But of the moments you've lived beneath this dome. Where you found the broken lens. Where you hid the compass. Where the baklava appeared. Where the comet light cast shadows so vivid you felt like you'd fallen into the sky. You draw slowly. Carefully. Quietly. This is your constellation. A janitor's sky. No one sees it at first. You don't want them to. You finish and cover it with an old tapestry. Not to hide it, just to protect it from dust. The next week, the tapestry is folded neatly on the floor. Someone has seen and added their own marks. Small, faint, but unmistakable. The tail of your largest star cluster now has 2 extra dots. You follow them and find, days later, a folded scroll behind the stairwell pillar. Inside, a simple note. "We see what you see." You reply by sweeping the south corridor in a spiral pattern. No one notices, until someone does. Then they leave a trail of chalk dots in return. A language is forming, not in words, but in gestures, acts of reverence, signals that say, "Yes, We're still here. One evening, the guard at the gate hands you a parcel. Doesn't say who it's from. Inside, 3 new cloths. Finely woven. A brass brush. A tiny bottle of imported rose oil. You bow, though no one is there. You put the items to use immediately. That night, the observatory shines again, not as a monument, not as a symbol, but as a home. You light a lantern and walk the corridors slowly, brushing each doorframe with a fingertip as you pass. You whisper the names of every scholar you can remember, every assistant, every visitor, even the ones who never learned yours. You reach the dome. You sit. You breathe. And above you, the stars blink softly, as if winking in approval. You whisper, "Still clean," and smile. The seasons turn without permission. The air grows colder. The stone beneath your feet less forgiving. The observatory has no fireplace. It never needed one, until it became a mausoleum of memory. Now the cold presses in like a stern librarian, reminding you to keep your movements slow, your voice low, your soul steady. You add a new task to your ritual: warmth. A kettle always on the edge of a heatstone. A woven mat laid beneath the desk where you sketch your star wall. A wool rag around your shoulders as you polish the brass. You're not as quick as you used to be. Your knees ache. Your fingers bend slower. But your eyes? Still sharp. Still janitorial. Still watching everything. And then, one afternoon, something unexpected. Footsteps. Not the tentative slippered steps of your quiet visitors. Not the guard's bored shuffle. But heavy, confident, purposeful boots. You freeze behind a bookcase. Rag in hand, heart drumming like a dropped pail. A voice calls out, "Hello?" You peer around the corner. A boy, no older than 15, wrapped in a scholar's robe 2 sizes too large, stands in the entryway, looking around as if the ceiling might answer him. He holds a bundle under one arm. Ink-stained fingers, nervous eyes. You don't speak. You step out, slow, measured. He startles. "You live here?" he asks. You shrug. "Not quite. I found this," he says, holding out the bundle. A scroll, unrolled. It reveals careful drawings of a planetary gear system. Not his work, someone else's. Aged, yellowed, drawn in the same hand you saw in Taqi ad-Din's sealed diagram years ago. "I think it was hidden in my grandfather's chest," the boy says. He used to speak of this place. Said it was the only building that ever listened to him. You take the scroll. Examine it. It matches, down to the tiny correction notes in the margins. Your breath slows. "I want to learn," the boy adds. You pause. Then you nod. From that moment, everything shifts. You don't become a teacher. Not exactly. But you show him the observatory. The safe corners. The good tables. The books that haven't grown brittle. The spots where the wind howls louder during spring. The cracks that leak rainwater if left unchecked. You show him your wall. Your constellation. He adds a dot for himself. A tiny star at the base. Labeled only, "Apprentice?" He comes each week. Sometimes with friends. Never more than 2 at a time. Always respectful. They whisper. They write. They clean. One of them even brings their own polish, lemon and vinegar. Too acidic. But the effort is appreciated. You never learn their names. You don't need to. Instead, you watch their marks appear on your map. A new set of lines. A pattern you hadn't seen. They build on what you started. Not better. Not worse. Just continued. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman scientific tradition was revived later under different names. Whether the knowledge passed through hidden schools or simply lived in hearts too stubborn to forget. You now know it lived in mop closets. In charcoal marks. In whispered lessons beside dusty bookshelves. One night, you find a small pouch resting on your bench. Inside, a folded robe. Plain, dark, soft, with a stitched emblem on the sleeve, a tiny star. Encircled by a brush. You wear it for the first time as you polish the great lens casing under the dome. You look up. The stars peer back. The moon is nearly full, throwing a pale glow across the floor. You can see your reflection in it. Faint and flickering. You chuckle. Not bad, old man. And then you notice something new. On the wall beside your sleeping nook. Someone has drawn a continuation of your constellation. Not on the plaster. On a hanging scroll. Easily removed, but left for you to see. It spirals outward, stars. Moons. Orbits, eventually curling into a simple shape. A broom. Your broom. You reach out. Trace it gently. It's not reverence, not mockery. It's memory, made visible. You add one final star at the top. A crooked dot, not quite straight, not perfect, but real. You whisper, "That's enough." From then on, your steps slow further. You stop polishing every surface. You leave some dust, some imperfections, not because you've given up, but because now you trust someone else will notice them too. One morning, a student enters and finds you asleep under the dome. Arms crossed, breath deep. He tiptoes past, doesn't disturb you. You awaken hours later, stretch, and find a cup of tea beside you. Still warm, with a note. Your constellation is safe. You drink it. You believe them. The observatory no longer echoes with loneliness. It sings, softly, slowly, through creaking floors and shifting shutters and chalk whispers on the walls. The janitor walks slower now. Yes, but the halls still gleam where it matters. The stars still shine through clean glass. And the broom still leans in its rightful place near the eastern stairwell. Worn smooth by 47 years of faithful hands. You rise earlier than usual today. Your joints protest, your knees ache, and even your shadow seems a step behind. But the air smells of rain and rose oil. And someone's left warm bread wrapped in cloth beside your stool. A gift, no note. You know who left it. You eat slowly, quietly, watching as the light spills through the windows, turning the dust motes into tiny planets spinning through golden space. The boy, the apprentice, the scholar in training, the barefoot learner with ink on his nose, greets you at the main door. He's brought others. They don't speak much. They clean, they sort, they catalog old fragments, and when they pass you, they nod, not as if you're invisible, not as if you're a piece of furniture, but like you are a chapter in a book they're still learning how to read. You spend the morning mending a loose stair rail, the afternoon helping a girl find a missing volume from the herbarium records, and the evening watching as 3 students trace your constellation wall with reverent fingers. No one speaks. They don't have to. The silence is full of gratitude. Later, someone places a polished stone in your hand. Smooth, dark, carved with a tiny star and a broom crossed beneath it. A token, a thank you, a symbol of all the unseen work you did while the rest of the world spun forward without you. You keep it. You walk one final lap around the observatory before sunset. The dome hums. The marble is warm underfoot. The smell of wax and ink and old dreams lingers in every corridor. You reach the broom. You pick it up. You sweep the floor, not because it needs it, but because you want to. The same arc, the same rhythm, the same quiet blessing whispered in circles. Over and over, until even time forgets the difference between labor and love. You pause at the dome. You sit beneath it. You look up. The stars wait. The building breathes. And so do you. You lie down beneath the dome one last time. The stone cools beneath you. Firm but familiar. Like an old friend who never asked for anything but presence. You close your eyes, feeling the distant hum of a city far below. The air still and calm. The scent of candle wax and crushed fig drifting lazily through the corridor behind you. The world softens. Footsteps grow quieter. Voices, now distant, drift like vapor. No more spilled ink to clean. No more broken lens stands to patch. No more hurried whispers of Jupiter's latest movement. Only rest. Outside, the wind taps gently at the shutters. Not to rattle them, but to remind you that everything continues, slowly, peacefully. The floor, your floor, remains smooth. The stars remain above. The building remains whole. You breathe out slowly. Somewhere, a young scholar copies your wall. Somewhere, a broom passes softly over stone. Somewhere, a name, your name, is spoken not loudly, but respectfully. And in that knowing, in that gentle final moment of stillness, you feel it. You were never forgotten. You were remembered in polish and silence. In moonlight and marble. In quiet footprints and soft chalk lines. The observatory sleeps now. And so can you. Sweet dreams.